Well, Geek in Review, we are back yet again. This time we are talking about Sherlock, Season 3, Episode 1, The Empty Hurst. What were your thoughts?
It was a lot better than I remembered. I think we could probably do an entire episode on the first 5 minutes of that's the first opening scene. And I was planning to do that, and I was just like, no, I'll talk myself out of all the crazy theories. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. There was some things that I thought kind of didn't work. Some characters I think had highlights in this episode. I'll get into that in a second, but I thought it was really good.
I really liked this episode from a point of taking all the fan theories and basically having a a video interpretation of whatever fan theory you could have running through your brain. As most of our viewers know, I didn't watch Sherlock when it was on the air, when it was on BBC America for me. So I didn't have to wait at all. I went from the season 2 cliffhanger right into season 3. But with that being said, that opening sequence of seeing Sherlock potentially drop to his death and seeing him, almost fall to the ground, but being pulled up by the bungee and shooting into one of the windows and kissing Molly, I was like, this is awesome. This probably isn't real. This probably is Sherlock, throwing smoke up somebody's ass, but it was still a brilliant, brilliant scene. I really, really, really felt bad for John Watson in this episode because Sherlock, sure, he did what he did to save all his friends and to beat Moriarty. That's all well and good. But why didn't he trust John enough to tell him the plan? Do you think that he didn't tell John the plan because he needed John's behavior to be believable?
Yes and no. I think that's one aspect of it. I think maybe another one that they didn't touch on directly or didn't even kind of hint on is that maybe it was to protect them as well. Because the people that knew were the people that had to know. He didn't want to just add another person onto that. So I think it was for a layer of protection as well. But I think that's something that the audience has to fill in the blank.
What did you think about how once Sherlock came back? What do you think about that scene when he goes to the restaurant where John is about to propose to Mary and he basically surveys the room and he takes little things away from each table to disguise himself as the waiter? And as he's reading John the wine selection, John is trying to get out the words to Mary, "Will you marry me?" But John, for the life of me, can't recognize him until Sherlock is like right on top of him. What did you think about Martin Freeman's performance in that particular moment? Because I think that that is Martin Freeman's shining moment in this, because his reaction to seeing Sherlock alive after 2 years of thinking that he was dead was just so great. It was so wonderful. What did you think about that scene?
That was a good scene, but I think because you mentioned it was one of Martin Freeman's best scenes. To rewind a little bit, I think I can't remember the actor's name, but the character of Lestrade in the opening scene where you see him at the coffee sort of
The coffee
van
shop,
with the
yeah.
other guy. Yeah, I think that's maybe his best scene and the best character development he's got in the whole season because we've
Poor
said before that
Lestrade.
that I think he's underused, and then the sort of other scene that he has is when Sherlock reveals himself as well, and he doesn't
So
really. I
great.
think he says one line like "you bastard" and then hugs him.
Yeah.
But yeah, with the Martin Freeman one, obviously they do it 2 or 3 times because when they leave the restaurant, they go somewhere else, and it keeps happening that Sherlock keeps putting his foot in it. But yeah, I thought it was better than I remember. I don't think the acting was particularly not. I'm going to contradict myself. I don't think the acting was particularly believable because if you just found out that someone that you thought was dead for 2 years showed up, you wouldn't
You
just
would lose your
stand there
mind.
and say nothing. Yeah, you would look because all he does is like slam his fist on the table. He
Right.
doesn't do anything else, and you would just completely lose your mind.
Sherlock basically tries to explain to John that he had to do what he had to do for specific reasons, but John doesn't even let him do it because he keeps attacking him.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that maybe bothers me about the production of Sherlock overall is it's on the BBC, so it's very clean and sanitized, and there's not a lot of overt violence or overt sexuality, and this show sort of fits into that. So when that was happening, for me, it was more for comedic effect rather than for the resolution between these two characters. Because if you were doing it as a drama, John Watson would be hitting Sherlock, so to sort of like, this is the pain that I felt to get it out of him, kind of thing. That's the way that I see it.
I really like the fact that in this first episode, as Sherlock is investigating a possible terrorist threat in the center of London, that because of his spout with John, he needs to find a new partner. And I love the fact, I absolutely adored the fact that he chose or he came to Molly to try and replace John Watson. What did you think about that whole dynamic?
It was a bit like if you're a fan of a band and the guitarist leaves and they get a new guitarist in. It's okay, but it doesn't really work. I mean, they could keep going, but it wouldn't be the same.
I think that Molly really got some much needed character development for the entire series in this one episode because she finally stands up for herself and she says, "Listen, I can't be here because of these reasons." And not only that, she actually is engaged to a guy in that scene where Sherlock and Molly in Sherlock's flat, and Sherlock says, "It's okay. I know you have a type, and I'm just happy for you, right?" I was really pleased by that scene because I felt that Sherlock in particular has been very disrespectful to Molly throughout the entire series. So it was really nice for me to see Sherlock give Molly her due. What did you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. He knows who he is and what he does and how it affects people, and that is just one time that he said to someone, "Look, maybe I could have done things a bit that not in so many words. I could have done things a bit differently, but I appreciate you for what you've done."
The character of Mary is actually one of my favorite characters in the series because I really love the twist that comes up a little bit later on that we'll get to at some point. But I really
Mm-hmm.
like what Mark Gatiss and Stephen Moffat did with the character of Mary because I thought that was a really interesting twist on, in my opinion, sort of a bland character in the other iterations of Sherlock.
Well, I don't know if you know, they're not together anymore, but that was Martin Freeman's partner for years. They were together for years and years.
Oh, really? Wow.
So
Okay.
yeah, yeah. So I think it was when the last season of Sherlock came out, they'd split up, but they were together for like over 10 years or something like that.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. Wow.
Yeah, I did I like her as an actress. I've seen her on a few other things, so quite a few things here in the UK. But talking about the Mary twist that we'll get into later on, that it was good at the time, but thinking about it now, it would have been nice to have someone who was normal, that was the normal one that they interacted with. It's sort of Mrs. Hudson, but they can't really do that bounce off her because it's an old woman. So it would be nice to have maybe the third member of the gang being the normal one. But yeah, good actress, good performance, liked it.
The one thing that I'm noticing here as we talk about episodes of Sherlock and as we go through the seasons, I really don't like the fact that most of these episodes are really not focused. Like there is so much stuff cracked packed into these 1 hour episodes that it's really frustrating. Because at the start of the episode, like I mentioned, Mycroft goes to get Sherlock in like a German prison somewhere, right? So
Yeah.
that main plot is set from the beginning. But in the meantime, you have Sherlock trying to convince, letting John know that he's not dead. You have Sherlock dealing with his parents, which is funny in his own right. We'll get to that.
Mm-hmm.
And you have Sherlock, for some reason, talking to this tram operator. And I'm like, what does this have to do with anything? What does this have to do with the main plot of the story that you guys introduced at the start of the episode? Like, how can, like, I don't know if it's just me, but I find the writing of Sherlock to be very, very overstuffed and too convoluted. Like, what do you think?
Well, one thing that occurred to me when I was watching the episodes, because you mentioned the scene at the start when he's getting tortured, that scene and the scene where he goes into the restaurant and he makes the deductions, you don't find out how he done it, because usually you see the little has a dog kind of thing. He just says things without any supporting his claims, which I thought was a little weird, and maybe that was for pacing. But I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
they're going to go back to doing that. It'll be interesting to see when we watch future episodes if they go back to him explaining how he deducted these things.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I understand what you mean. I think everything else in this episode, other than the reunion, is just a B or maybe a C plot at best.
I just found it to be overly stuffed and overly messy. Like I did like the all the reunion scenes between Sherlock and our main cast. Specifically, I thought that the Mrs. Hudson reunion with Sherlock was hilarious because poor Mrs. Hudson there
Yeah,
was
it was really
cleaning
good.
dishes and then she just screamed her head off. And that whole scene with Sherlock finding the bomb finally in the train and figuring out that this guy wanted to destroy British Parliament on the 5th of November because they were voting on an anti-terrorist bill. We don't get to know if I'm or tell me if I missed something. We don't get to know anything about the guy who planted the bomb. So it's almost like the main plot of this episode was an afterthought. It's almost like they just wanted to focus on the John Watson reunion and the regular cast reunion and how Sherlock survived death.
Yeah, as I was saying a minute ago, everything else after the sort of reunion or any other story, you could have done anything. It could have just been like a simple murder. It didn't have to be this big bomb plot. I think if they maybe had done a murder or a crime similar to the one that was in the first episode with a woman that's found in pink, that would have been simple. It's like Marvel. Not every film has to be a save the world film. In this case, it doesn't have to be a save London episode. So I think, yeah, you're right on that. They could have toned it down and they could have trimmed it a little bit. But again, it's 3 1.5 hour episodes every whatever it was, 2 years or 18 months.
It's pretty obvious because Martin Freeman at the time and Benedict Cumberbatch were riding high. But I wonder
Mm.
why. I wonder why the BBC, Mark Gatiss and Stephen Moffat chose this format. Do you think they chose this format because of the 2 stars that they wanted to get?
I think with the position that Stephen Moffat was in at the time, riding high on Doctor Who, he could probably get a little bit more creative control than people normally would with the BBC. And you've got to remember as well, at the time that the first episode aired, no one knew who Benedict Cumberbatch was, and Martin Freeman was the guy from The Office. They weren't stars. So I think it's
Not yet.
more
Okay.
I think it's more Stephen Moffat went, this is what I want to do. And if I want to tell these stories, I want an hour and a half or I want 2 hours. And yeah, they could have done it over one story over what 6 half-hour or 45-minute episodes. I don't think that would hold your interest. I think it was designed to sort of hold your interest as well.
Okay. Okay. So, if I'm understanding you correctly, you don't think that that Sherlock would have worked under a 45-minute regular, regular format for a TV show? You think you think that it was specifically designed to be this long and to hold our interest for this long?
Especially with the way the dialogue is, you couldn't put in all the sort of Sherlock. I mean, I'm talking about the character Sherlock has direct dialogue in. Put everyone else would probably have like 3 lines around him in an episode if you're doing a 45-minute episode. I mean, like a scene between him and Mycroft, that's about a third or a quarter of an episode if you're doing it that way. As the stars rose and as the show rose, people started to look at it as like mini movies, I suppose, in a way.
Okay, cool. No, because not because when I think about Sherlock, that's what I think of Sherlock as. Every episode is like a mini movie. So, do you have any particular scenes that you want to talk about that you liked in particular for whatever reason?
Well, yeah, I meant to ask you because the bit at the start when you're seeing what people think happened to Sherlock and someone grabs John and sort of hypnotizes him. Do you know who that guy is?
No, I have no idea who the guy
It is
is.
a He's not a hypnotist. I can't remember what he calls himself, but he's like an entertainer called Darren Brown. And he started off like doing these things like hypnotizing people. But he's moved on to like doing ones where he'll take you for like a day, and I don't want to ruin anything because all his stuff sort of twists. But there's one where he takes a bunch of candidates and he tells them, I can program you that you will rob an armored car if you see certain signals, and people
Oh my
do it.
God.
And he done one where he got someone to go up to the ledge of a building, and he was like,
Oh,
you want to jump off? But he does a lot of like disproving psychics and proving that stuff's all fake as well. So if you've never heard of
oh,
Darren Brown, he's a very interesting guy.
I really found it interesting that Sherlock and Mycroft have parents.
Played by Benedict Cumberbatch's real parents.
I thought that it was very, very nice to see Sherlock basically be like that. Basically, be like that 5-year-old kid in the car, just like wanting his parents to shut the fuck up.
I thought it was a bit like, imagine Sherlock's a teenager at high school and they've showed up to drop off his lunch. That's what it felt like to me.
I really enjoyed this episode. The only problems that I had with it was I thought that it was way too unfocused. I thought there was too much packed into everything, and I thought the main plot of the episode, the bombing plot, I really thought that that was just thrown in there to focus away from what they really wanted to talk about, which was Sherlock going back from the dead and reconnecting with everyone. If it was just Sherlock going around and reintroducing himself to everybody and apologizing for everything, that would have been more interesting to me, but that wouldn't have probably kept the audience's attention if it was just an episode of Sherlock saying, "I'm sorry" to a ton of people for an hour and 30 minutes.
When I think about it a little bit more, if you're putting in sort of individual murder, you're asking or demanding that people pay very close attention to try and solve a murder and then try and solve the Sherlock riddle. So I suppose maybe that's why they just went with a terrorist bomb, because it's Die Hard. Everyone knows what Die Hard is. You wrap your head around it in 2 seconds. But yeah, they could have toned it down a little bit. Like, they didn't really need it, the length of the scenes, like when Molly and Sherlock go to that guy's flat.
The other thing that I absolutely hate about this episode, Mark Gatiss and Stephen Moffat keep harping on this. It annoys the crap out of me every time they bring it up. Every season that we've talked about Sherlock on the channel here, they bring up the fact that everybody thinks that John and Sherlock are in a relationship.
I forgot we haven't talked about that yet. Yeah, they do it quite a lot. I think maybe the fact that it makes us angry is a sign that gay couples now are normal and the everyday thing. It's not something to be made fun of, or not something that's for a little comedy joke.
The other thing that I liked is I like the dynamic between Molly and John, and now that I know that they were married, it makes complete sense why their dynamic was so good, because I thought they were great, and now I know why.
What, the scene where he's getting ready to shave the mustache off and she's sort of making fun of them, I thought there's probably not a lot of acting required there.
What did you think about John with the mustache?
Well, I think it was a nod to the films, because in most of the old films, when they're set in the proper times, Victorian times, he's got a mustache. Yeah, I'm trying to think at the time that this was on, the whole beard thing was trendy. So maybe Martin Freeman can't grow a beard because he's got blonde hair, but yeah, if he kept a mustache, it wouldn't have bothered me.
I did not like the second to last scene where Sherlock is talking to the police detective that started the society that investigated what happened to Sherlock. I thought that character was treated like an idiot. He really lost his mind, I thought.
Someone who's normal up until he reads something on Facebook, then becomes like an insane QAnon deep state conspiracy theorist.
Do we think he still works for the police department? Because that's not really stated.
Yeah, I mean, he could be doing a desk job rather than out on the street. But yeah, I don't think he really comes back into it from here on out.
What the hell happened to Molly? She disappeared. You know what I find humorous about Sherlock is the way they handle character departures. Like, some they address, like Lestrade, they have to address that. But others, they're like, oh, this person was here this episode and they're gone the next, and we're not even going to talk about them anymore.
Yeah, I think that's maybe one of the flaws of the show, is that everyone outside of John and Sherlock doesn't matter. You could just have a detective of the week, or a scientist of the week, or whatever, or a journalist of the week, and because there's no real development in anyone after it.
The only two characters that we really know inside and out to this point are Sherlock and John. We don't really know that much about anybody else.
I don't think it's a terrible criticism of the show. I just think, in terms of where TV was at the time, TV's now changed so much that we want that deep character development, and we didn't want it back then.
So you seem to be a little bit more positive on this episode. From a writing aspect, I thought that it was like all over the place.
I like, though, that it played with the audience's expectation, that it didn't answer the big question that everyone wants. John says that. He's like, I don't care how you done it. I want to know why you done it.
Before we go, I have to address the scene with John and Sherlock in the train, when John thinks that they're seconds away from dying, and John really has that heart-to-heart conversation with Sherlock that I thought he could have had in the restaurant. But the restaurant, like we said earlier, was played for laughs. But I really liked that when John thought that he was going to die, he really confessed to Sherlock that Sherlock is his best friend, and he basically thinks that he's the most brilliant person he's ever met, and all this and that. And I love the fact that after Sherlock gets tired of being, charmed upon, he starts laughing, and he goes, "There's a little button." I thought it was really good for them to have that heart to heart conversation because as the episode was going on, I think that's the kind of response that I wanted John to have in the restaurant. I'm not saying that it wasn't fun seeing Martin Freeman kick the shit out of Benedict Cumberbatch like 4 or 5 times. I'm not saying that that wasn't fun. I'm just really happy that he got to have that moment of sincerity with Sherlock on the train. All right, geeks. So if the good folks want to catch your endeavors online, what would be the best place for them to do that on?
Yeah, just go to YouTube and type in the Geek in Review in the search bar, and you'll find my channel. Or I'm on Twitter at the Geeks Reviews. That's all the one word.
All right, that sounds great. And if you guys want to catch me in all my adventures online, I'm also on Twitter. I'm at CreekFanatic88. But until next time, guys, thank you so much for watching. And as always, I'll see you when I see you.
So much happened here, and so much is about to.